Namaste. Welcome to the Advaita Channel. I'm Bhagavati, and tonight I'll continue reading from Adyashanti, Resurrecting Jesus. This is part 5 of a series of readings from this beautiful book. I'd like to open first with a piece from Srimuji.
Beloved Father, who dwells within the soul of my being, whose name is I Am. Veneration to your holy name. Thy kingdom is here. Thy will prevails throughout the earth, as it does in the heavenly realms of my soul. You open your hands and satisfy the hunger of all living beings. You heal all hearts of sorrow, so that they in turn may show forgiveness to those whose minds are shrouded in ignorance of the self. Beloved Mother, who imparts to all the sense of choice, so we may finally come to choose you, who are truth, and thus find everlasting freedom. Glory to your name, O Truth. For yours is the kingdom of existence, of peace and love. All power and glory emanates from you alone, who imparts to all the wisdom, light, love, and courage to refer to themselves as I am. Amen. Om.
Namaste, Nitya. Namaste, Adam. Namaste, Namai. Who isn't appearing on the chat, but I know is watching live from wherever she's located. Namaste, Ananda, watching in Wales, probably tomorrow morning. And to all those Sangha friends around the world joining us this evening. Let's continue our story of Jesus Christ, the mystic. Now, many people think of these biblical narratives that make up the Jesus story as strictly factual and historical. For some, it is an article of faith to take every word in the Bible as the word of God. I'm not going to argue with those who see it this way. But if one can also see it mythically, we can see that it reveals new meanings. So, whether we see the Jesus story as fact or as myth, or a combination of both, doesn't really matter. It's helpful simply to peer into the mythical orientation, into that deep sense of storytelling that our ancestors knew so intimately. Our modern understanding of myth as untruth has left us confused about the function of myth. Myth is not the opposite of fact. It is an invitation for each of us to enter into a story whilst teasing out its metaphorical and symbolic meaning. What myth carries is not fact, not history, but truth, the ultimate reality. This is what we're all doing here in Satsang. We're here for truth, the ultimate reality. This is all that we're here for. This is all that Satsang is for. And Jesus was no different than us. The Jesus story carries this ultimate reality, and that's why 2,000 years later it remains so compelling. The God-man. The God-man. It's hyphenated here, so it's the God-man. In many ways we could read this. In Christian theology, Jesus is both God and man. Now, many of the world's spiritual traditions have their own versions of the God-man. And in the vast majority, there is very little humanity left in the God-man character. One of the amazing things about the Jesus story is that when you read the Gospels, you will find that this God-man retains some very human characteristics. Remember, if you've listened to this book earlier, Adyashanti's gone quite deeply already in his own studies into the Gospels and into the mysticism of them and the storytelling of them, and in particular the Gospel of John, which perhaps is the most mystical of all the Gospels. In fact, I was so drawn by these readings that I purchased a copy of the Gospel of John and have been reading that. Very, very beautiful. Some very beautiful stories about Christ and his words and his presence, but in such a true sense. When I was growing up, the cultural expression of Jesus made him seem much more God than man to me. He seemed magisterial, floating above everything that happened in the story. But when I opened up the New Testament and I started to read, I was surprised to find a character that had a very dynamic quality of inner development. When we think of our humanity, we think of what we feel and how we react to the events in our lives. People have good days and bad days. They have upsets. They have joys. They have sorrows. And this whole spectrum of experience makes up our humanity. In Jesus, the quality of divinity is obviously important, but the quality of humanity is important as well. Jesus is perhaps the only God-man figure in all of religion that we can really identify with. He has his good days. He has his bad days. He experiences happiness, and he experiences sorrow. And in fact, we know all too well how he suffered on the cross. So he's experienced suffering also. For an example of Jesus' deep humanity, take the moment in the Garden of Gethsemane, when it suddenly dawns on him that he's going to be crucified. At first, he's distraught, even frightened. He begs God to relieve him of having to go through this experience, saying, "Father, everything is possible for you. Take this cup from me." This was taken from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 14, verse 36. Essentially, he's asking, do I really have to go through with this? These kinds of human characteristics are not often found in the God-men of religion. As I read through the Gospel story, I found this mixture of divinity and humanity really compelling. It connected with me as a human being because I saw those same qualities in my own experience. My own spiritual development has shown me that we're all, in essence, the divine radiance of pure being, and that we also have our human side, our good days and our not so good days. Our human condition is reflected in the great humanity of Jesus. And I believe this is one of the reasons that so many people have felt so deeply connected to Jesus over the centuries. Reading the Gospels, I was struck by the quality of vitality in Jesus, especially in contrast to how the Buddha is presented in Buddhism. The iconic image of the Buddha is seated in full lotus position, meditating. It's an image meant to convey the sense of eternity experienced when we touch upon the deepest nature of our being. Of our being. He's emphasizing this here. Once again, eternity is peering through the latticework of time and space, and this sense of eternal stillness and deep freedom is what the iconic image of the seated Buddha conveys. What this image doesn't convey is a sense of humanity, of a real flesh and blood human being. But in the Jesus story, it's as if the still point that the image of the Buddha evokes within us becomes a very dynamic engagement with life. Very much contrasting stories. The Buddha escaping suffering, sitting in stillness, finding his inner being, finding his truth, sitting with it. From that peace, taking it out into the world, teaching it for the 40 years that he walked this earth teaching. And Jesus Christ, could we imagine a greater suffering that he could have taken upon himself? He didn't run and hide. He requested his Father, God, could he take it away from him? And when he couldn't, he faced it. He faced his suffering square on. He looked it straight in the eye, knowing it was his to bear. Very contrasting stories, yet two greatly remembered beings. Are they any different? The core of their presence on this earth, no different, and no different than you or I. Both had only one wish, and that was for truth, and to live that truth. The image of the crucifixion, the most iconic image from the Jesus story, of course, is of Jesus being crucified on the cross. It's very unusual for the God-man of any religion to have as their iconic image a vision of suffering and death. Though, of course, the crucifixion opens up the way for the resurrection. If you think we only have to walk into a church, as I know Nemai has this evening, and to look up, and there above the altar will always be a crucifix. In this room where I sit and read, there's a crucifix in this room. It's not my room, but they're found in so many places around us. A very strong, iconic image. An image of suffering. Is it an image of freedom? Let's find out. This image deeply connects to our humanity. We're not being nailed to crosses today. And that's a really fortunate thing. But most people who have lived a few decades will have found their own way of experiencing a type of crucifixion. There is a tragic element to human existence for all of us. Moments of life when you feel completely overwhelmed or at your wit's end. Whether we want to acknowledge it or not, whether we're running away from it or we're engaged in spirituality in an effort to transcend it, nonetheless, that tragic element of life exists. It can take many forms. A terminal illness, a parent losing their child, a child losing their parent, a husband losing his wife, the death of a friend, losing the job, getting divorced. These are the moments when life bites back. In these moments when life bites back, that I'm pretty confident to say that most of those listening will have experienced at least one of those, at least. Unless perhaps you're very young. These moments when life bites back, what does Guruji say? When life bites us, it's good. Because when life bites us, it reminds us to escape the suffering. It reminds us to find a way out. It drives us forward. Because if we're too comfortable, nothing bites us. There's no grit in the pearl, no grit in the oyster to create the pearl. We get complacent, we get too comfortable. We can be content. We can say, my life's a simple life, it's an easy life, but it's a happy life, I'm content, it's good enough for me, it's no trouble, it's not exciting, it's not this, but it's okay, it's good. But what happens when life bites back? We look within. Why do we look within? Because we have to. Because it's the only way we can survive these kind of experiences, because they push our buttons so madly that we have to dig deep. We have to dig really deep to get through them, to get beyond them, to transcend them, to transcend the suffering. So when life bites us like this, Guruji says, we should bow our heads and we should say, thank you, thank you, thank you. And in fact, he also says that even when life isn't biting us, we should bow our heads and in gratitude say, thank you, thank you, thank you. Because if life's feeling okay, one thing we can guarantee is something will come along and bite us. So just be grateful. Be grateful when it's happening, because it's a gift, it's grace. And for us to be grateful when it's not happening, because there but for grace go I. So it's all grace. There are only two certainties about life: that you will someday die, and that between birth and death you will encounter tragedy. I think people associate the iconic image of Jesus on the cross with a certain kind of tragedy. When you're pushed beyond your limits, when everything that you might have believed in breaks down, and in that moment, nothing comes to rescue you, nothing comes to save you, and yet nonetheless you have to go through with the experience. Oh yes. Yes, 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 I know this one. I've been pushed like this more times than I might have chosen if I had a choice about such things. I've been pushed like this so hard in this past year, this year that supposedly ends in a few hours in my time zone. Maybe at another time in my life, they might have been enough to make me back off, to make me panic, or to make me run, But this year I faced them head on. I dived into them. I took my master's pointings And as he said, I held the inquiry like a stone, as a diver takes a rock, to help them go deeper. Holding the stone close to my heart, to dive deep into the inquiry. That's what these gifts are. That's what sufferings are. They're gifts. They're treasure. Ultimately, there's a triumph through meeting the tragic elements of life. From one perspective, the entire Jesus story reads like a Greek tragedy. But the beauty of the story is in how it reveals that sense of eternity, that still point in the midst of difficulty, that divinity shining through the lattice work of time and space. The story of Jesus has a triumphant ending, but it's essentially a tragic story. Yet through the tragedy shines this radiance of eternal being. Being, again he highlights this, eternal being. As Jesus says, the kingdom of the Father is spread out upon the earth, and men do not see it. This is from the Gospel of Thomas, another of the mystic Gospels. That is an extraordinary statement from someone who has had to live through such tragedy. Let's say it again. The kingdom of the Father is spread out upon the earth. Adam says, holding to the stone of inquiry, wow, beautiful. Oh, it so is. I remember the first time I ever heard that. I think if you search, you would find a video on YouTube of Guruji explaining this, describing it. It's the most incredible tool. This inquiry, this question, who am I? It's a tool to help us dive deeper, to discover our true nature. Jesus is saying that the kingdom of heaven is right here, in the place where he's undergoing his trials. It doesn't come afterwards, it's here. And men do not see it. We don't see it. We overlook it. We look the other way. We avoid it. Maybe we do everything we can to not see it for a certain time in our lives. The beauty of the Jesus story is that he did see eternity whilst here on this earth. He was eternity, divine being at his core and in his substance. And notice here Adyashanti is saying that he was eternity and that he did see it. He's not saying he became it. He was it, just as we're already eternity. We are already divine. And all we need to do is see it with our own clear eyes, to wash them clean of conditioning, habitual thinking and habitual conceiving of objects and experiences and people, even of spirituality. And with our eyes washed clean, we can see things as they truly are, and we can recognize the divinity within ourselves. And we can love that. And we can love ourselves for that. Divine being at the core, at his core, and in his substance. In his substance, even in what's his substance? His body, his life, his environment. So this divinity, it's not something that's inside of me, it's not something that's outside of me. It's inside of me, it's outside of me, it's my fingertips, it's my hair, it's the ground I walk on, it's the breath I breathe, it's the light I see when I look at Father. It's the joy I feel when I hear his voice. Sit in satsang with Guruji. It's all of this. Jesus was divinity having a human experience. Or as Guruji would say, Jesus was emptiness walking in the form of a human being. Jesus was divinity having human experience. Whether we have realized this in our own experience, or whether we just intuitively connect to it, there is a way that we can sense this divinity showing through the world of time. There is a sense of meaning throughout all of life. There is a sense of radiance. The Jesus story is both a tragedy and a triumph. And that's why it connects to our lives. In fact, the triumph and the tragedy are intimately locked together throughout the whole of the Jesus story, from the very beginning to the very end. It doesn't begin in tragedy and end in triumph. These two elements are inextricably entwined. The story connects in a nuanced way with both our humanity, and our divinity. Just take a sip of tea. The spiritual mystery that we are. I'm looking at you and I know that you're a spiritual mystery. Actually, to me, it doesn't feel like a mystery at all. It feels that I'm looking at you and I see this divinity. I see only the truth. I see only that you're not believing who you truly are. It's the mystery. Let's find out. The spiritual mystery that we are. Whomever Jesus may or may not have been, historically, he symbolizes the spiritual mystery of each one of us. We are all divine being manifesting as human being. All of us. So whoever you are watching this or listening to this, whenever you're listening, that means you. You're not excluded from this. You can't be excluded from this. Everyone's on the guest list for this party. We're all divine being manifesting as human being. Jesus represents that radiance of divine being, that felt sense of eternity within us all. When we look back over the arc of our lives, from the time we were born to the present moment, each of us can touch upon that intuition that there's something about us that is unchanged. Throughout all of the ups and downs and changes of life, something is now as it ever was. Something doesn't change. To touch upon this is to begin to experience eternity within. Through the whole trajectory from birth to childhood to adolescence and then into adulthood, but also emotionally and intellectually. Yet something remains unchanged. That sense of something unchanged is the eternal spark within. At the beginning, it may be felt as a very subtle, almost incomprehensible intuition. Thank you, Adam. Happy New Year, Adam. Bye, beloved. Throughout all the ups and downs and changes of life, something is now as it ever was. To touch upon this is to begin to experience eternity within. Through the whole trajectory from birth to childhood to adolescence, and then into adulthood, we change so much. Not only physically, but also emotionally and intellectually. Yet something remains unchanged. That sense of something unchanged is the eternal spark within. At the very beginning, it may be felt of as a very subtle, almost incomprehensible intuition. But when we bring our full attention to that felt intuition, of that which is the same throughout our whole lives, then that little seed of divine radiance can begin to reveal itself, can begin to shine brighter and brighter in our lives. I believe that the character and presence of Jesus has something very important to show us in this regard. That each one of us is the son or the daughter of God. As the great 14th century Catholic mystic Meister Eckhart has said, the Father gives birth to his Son without ceasing. And I say more, he gives birth to me, his Son, and the same Son. That's an extraordinarily bold statement, and bolder because he said it in the 14th century, where the church still had the power to burn you at the stake or to imprison you if you were found guilty of heresy. And yet Meister Eckhart had the courage to come forth and say that he and Christ are one and the same Son, that he was the Son of God, not just Christ. If he can say that, then that means I'm a child of God, I'm the daughter of God, you're the son of God, the daughter of God. We're all God's children. One and the same. This is the perennial mystic revelation of the awakening to our true nature, at one with the divine. When we begin to embody in a deep way the spirit of Jesus we find in this story, then we might begin to feel and sense and experience ourselves becoming that presence, and know that presence is actually something that lives within ourselves. The Jesus story is a means of activating the living presence of our being, so that we realize that each one of us is the son or daughter of the living God. In the Gospel of Thomas, Jesus says, "There is light within a man of light, and he lights up the whole world." That light within us all is that which you intuit when you sense that something about you has remained unchanging throughout all the days of your life. This light that Adyashanti is referring to, this is the same light that Father Dhananta refers to as the light of the Sangha of being. And when he tells us that the Advaita Channel, and why he brought this into the world, was so that we could share our light with the world and share the light of all these great teachers who we're reading and sharing. So not just Adyashanti, not even just Jesus Christ, but Guruji, Father, Papaji, Ramana, Gangaji. So many great teachers, but all the same light. The same light is shining from our hearts, radiating out into the world right now. It's a joy it is to take part in this. That light within us all is that which you intuit when you sense that something about you has remained unchanging throughout all the days of your life. If you put your attention on it, if you meditate upon it in stillness, it can open up and reveal that it is indeed the divine light, that which lights up the whole world. In fact, the more awake we become to our own divinity, the more we feel revitalized by a living presence, by that which reveals that life is sacred. Human life is sacred. All of life is sacred. So I like this tiny meditation that falls in the midst of this paragraph. Let us read it again and just contemplate upon it. In the Gospel of Thomas, Jesus says, "There is light within the man of light, and he lights up the whole world." That light within us all is that which you intuit when you sense that something about you has remained unchanging throughout all the days of your life. If you put your attention on it, if you meditate upon it in stillness, it can open up and reveal that indeed it is the divine light, that which lights up the whole world. In fact, the more awake we become to our own divinity, the more we feel revitalized by a living presence, by that which reveals that life is sacred. Human life is sacred. All of life is sacred. Jesus concludes that passage in the Gospel of Thomas by saying, "If he does not shine, he is darkness." That's the challenge. That's the Jesus who tells it to us straight, who doesn't water down the message. Either we are in light or we are in darkness. That's a teaching meant to shake us from our slumber. If we are not recognizing that we are the light, we're the light that we've been searching for. If we don't see that, we may as well be the darkness. Jesus wants to shake us from our sleep. He wants us to wake up to who we truly are. In order to come into our full potential and to embody the truth and radiance of what we are, We must come again, vitally alive. Vitally alive. Full power, as Guruji would say. We must lean once again into our presence, not away from it. We mustn't back away from our divinity, from our presence. We must lean into it like we lean into the strongest wind, and we won't fall over, it will hold us. Lean into it. Feel its strength. Feel that we're supported. This divinity will not let you fall. We must pour ourselves forth into life. Instead of trying to escape life and avoid its challenges. Then our lives themselves become expressions of love, of overflow, because we have compassionately given ourselves to life, to our incarnation, as a means to redeem it, to bring everything home, back to its source, to the eternal radiance within each and every one of us. Just sit with that a moment before I play the beloved prayer from Guruji.
Beloved, all that you perceive is transient, is passing. But you are the unchanging one, timeless and perfect. Rid yourself of all delusions and come lay down here in the silence of being. For unlike time, you are not passing. You are the formless within all forms, the silence and stillness inside all movements of time and manifestation. Arise into the fullness of your real nature as the unchanging self, the goal and source of all being. Namah Shivaya. Om Namah Shivaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate. Shri Jesus Christ. Ki Jai. Om Namo Bhagavate. Shri Mujiji. Ki Jai. Om Namo Bhagavate. Shri Anantaji. Ki Jai. God bless this Sangha of Being and the Advaita Channel, that we can continue to pour our own light out into the world. Happy New Year.